everybody. Welcome. My name's Jeannie Rosner. I'm so excited that you all are here. Let me tell you a little bit about me and Soul Food Salon, and then I'll do the introduction with Drew. So we started Soul Food Salon about 7.5 years ago. Our mission is to educate and empower us all to be healthier. And I do that through all different forms. We do these monthly events where I feature different health and wellness experts. I have a website, soulfoodsalon.com, where everything that we have done in the past is there available. We have past recipes, past presentations. We have a health and wellness newsletter that we send out digitally a few times a month called Soulful Insights. All of our past publications are there. We actually published one today, or posted one today, with the title of Anxiety by another psychiatrist named Alex Demetrio. He's presented for us before. So you can go on our website, everything is there, a plethora of information. I'm very active on social media, predominantly Instagram. So follow along, Soul Food Salon, all one word. Again, my message is to inspire us all to be healthier. Everything is science and evidence-based. So you will learn a lot, I hope, by looking at all my information. Every year we partner with a different nonprofit. And so basically when you come and attend to my events, historically they were in person, and now since COVID, we've been doing them virtually. But I ask you as the audience to please help support this nonprofit that I partner with. So we're partnered this year with Off Their Plate, which is a national organization, a nonprofit that was started 1 year ago, March 2020, by a third-year medical student at Harvard. And what happened was, as COVID hit, the cafeterias closed in their hospitals, and she was seeing that the restaurants in the area were closing as well. And so she married the two together, and she kept the restaurant workers employed by making meals for the hospital workers. And they're now present in 9 cities. We are helping the Bay Area effort. And it's not only now for healthcare workers, but it's really for the at-need community. And essentially a $100 donation helps employ a restaurant worker for 3 hours, and it provides 10 meals to the at-need community. So you can make a donation to them. I would appreciate it on any of the media that I put out. And it's also on my website. Under the main page, there's a little information about Off Their Plate, and there's a little video, and then there's a specific link that was created solely for Soul Food Salon for donations. If you go to the Off Their Plate website and make a donation, we don't get the credit. Not that it matters, it's still going to a great cause, but for us to get tallied for credit, go on my site and make the donation, please. So our next event is on Wednesday, April 14th, and it's with Adar Cohen. He has a PhD in conflict resolution, and his salon is called Peace at Home. Adar has held, for the past 20 years, he's led conversations in conflict zones, family rooms, and other places where people need to hear and be heard. It should be a fascinating event. I will send out the email with his information shortly. And those that want to can subscribe to my email list at my website, again, soulfoodsalon.com. At the very top of all the pages, there's a little link that says subscribe to our Soulful Insights newsletter. That really gets you on the master email list. So this event is virtual. I'm going to hand it over to Drew in just a minute. Drew will do his presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll do our best to get to those questions. And then it's also being recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube channel, also at Soul Food Salon, probably sometime later today or tomorrow. I will send out an email as well to those that are on my email list that get my Soulful Insights emails. So stay tuned for that. So today I have the honor to introduce Drew Ramsey. He wears many hats, which I honestly, I don't understand how he does it all, but he is a psychiatrist, an author, a book author, where he actually just launched this most recent book, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, hence the name of our salon today. He is a farmer, and he's also the founder of the Brain Food Clinic in New York City. He's the leading proponent of using dietary change to help with mood, brain function, and mental health. And I can't even imagine a more pertinent time for Drew's message in the situation where we've had COVID for the last year, where there's been tremendous isolation anxiety, depression, and uncertainty. I believe Drew's message, where we can take control of some of this through diet, will be really helpful. So I'm going to mute myself and stop my video, and Drew is going to take it away.
Thank you, Jean. Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm going to share my slide deck, and I'm so excited. Jean, that was so nice. Thank you for everything you said. I'm in the middle of book launch, so I just have to do this as like a reflex, but I've been looking forward to this event to get to really commune with an exciting audience. Jean's been telling me about the group and that we can really delve in at a deep level to the science between food and mental health. So I brought my big slide deck. The warning there is that I'm going to go through it quickly so Jean and I have time for questions and answers. As Gina said, I'm a nutritional psychiatrist, so I'm really interested in the intersection between food and mental health, and interested in how we can employ food in a clinical setting. There we go. And so I've titled this talk, Feed Your Mental Health, because that's really my hope, is that from this talk, it's not just a bunch of interesting science for you, or some maybe recommendations that you've heard before: eat some seafood, eat leafy greens. I'm not sure even that many of the foods will be so surprising, but instead I hope that you really take from this a reorientation about how you should think about nutrition, because we've really done quite a number on ourselves the way we're thinking about it now. Just kind of go from the 30,000 foot view, we're not in good shape, as most of us know, on a population level. And a lot of that has to do with the foods we eat and not prioritizing our brain health. Quickly, my disclosures, because I'm a physician. I'm on the editorial board at Medscape Psychiatry. I am on the advisory board of Men's Health Magazine, which, if you're on Instagram right now, I've taken over Men's Health Magazine's Instagram account, and there's stories where there's a brain food challenge, hashtag MH Brain Food Challenge, if you want to participate. Today is Wild Salmon Day. I'm an author, so you should probably be a little suspicious of everything I say. And so I'm going to try and present a lot of evidence to support this idea that food and mental health relate. I'm not going to talk about any off-label medications, except I do consider the cacao bean a medicine personally. These are the books that I've written before, all on nutritional psychiatry. And then this is my farm. I'm actually talking to you right now from here. This is in rural Indiana, Crawford County. We are claim to fame. We have several. We have one of the largest cavern systems in the world here, 26 miles. We also are the poorest county in Indiana. But I've gone from that farm to eventually become a New York City psychiatrist, which, as Jerry Garcia said, what a long, strange trip it's been. And especially now, as I've been in quarantine on my farm in Indiana as a internet psychiatrist, which we can talk about later. So this is New York City. This is the Brooklyn Grange farm. And it's just been fascinating to me as a farm boy to see us get so interested in food, so interested in this farm to table movement, and even seeing places like New York City start to have farms. I've just loved that, being a farm kid. Why should we talk about food and mental health? Well, when we think about the economy, when we think about disability worldwide, the number one cause of disability, meaning just us not being our best selves, is our mental health disorders. And the same thing in the US. 2020, before the pandemic was going to hit, 2020 was already the year predicted when depression would be the top cause of disability in the US. And I just think disability is a really, really interesting concept, especially applied to mental health and nutrition, because often we focus on mortality, right? We want to know, like, does this kill you or not? And what's particularly pernicious and challenging about mental health disorders is the way that they cause disability, not necessarily the way they cause mortality. This has become my least favorite statistic in mental health. 1 in 5 of you watching has a mental illness. I think that's horrible, because 5 out of 5 of you have a human brain. And I don't know, I've been a psychiatrist for a while now. All of us are at risk for things like anxiety and depression, even more severe disorders, bipolar disorder, psychotic breaks, addiction. 50% of men have a substance use disorder in their lifetime. So I really like the idea, look, 5 out of us got one of these like moody, fragile, super wonderful things called a human brain. And we need to learn how to take care of it and how to feed it, because we don't really take care of it when it breaks, right? 60% of adults with mental illness don't actually get treatment. This goes up to like 80% if you're talking about men who have mental health concerns seeking treatment. Half of our kids who are having significant mental health concerns don't get treatment. And so there's been this trend as we're thinking about mental health over the past 10 years to begin thinking about food. This is back in 2016, one of the first kind of popular articles really talking about the science of nutritional psychiatry. And since at some point it's gonna, like the rubber hits the road, you're gonna wonder what I'm gonna say to eat. I just wanted to put this up here, not as my recommendation yet, but more as you hear this data and this evidence, I'd like you to think about these foods with me. These were the power players in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, because when you write a book, you have to recommend food. And even though I like to recommend food categories, and I'll tell you about that in a second, I just wanted you to see what the foods are that I ended up with. As if you're looking to, I don't really love that superfood idea, but if you're looking for great foods for your brain, this is where I think data really directs us to eat more of these foods, and more importantly, the food categories that they're in. Now, quickly, your brain is a hungry, hungry beast, hungrier than any other cell in your bodies. Those neurons just slurp up nutrition, 420 calories a day. When I used to go run inside in the gym and I get on the treadmill, it took me a long time for that little calorie counter to get up to 420. About 20% of your daily calories. Certain nutrients like folate, vitamin C, omega-3 fats get quite concentrated in the brain. And then your brain houses and is made of these polyunsaturated fatty acids. So that's what omega-3 fat and omega-6 fats are. What that means, it's a very long fat, and they have a lot of energy stored within the fat, so they're highly oxidizable. That's why when fish kind of begins to smell off so quickly, there's so many omega-3 fats in there. And then your brain has lots of cholesterol. I just like to say that because cholesterol is like the villain of the story so far, and that's really, I think, badly misinformed. Cholesterol, like, you like sex, I like sex, everyone likes sex. Your sex hormones are made of cholesterol. Vitamin D, we all agree that's great for your mental. Vitamin D is made of cholesterol. Focusing on dietary cholesterol, I think, misses the point in terms of how to feed the human brain. Nutritional psychiatry is just how I defined it, because we didn't really have a definition. I think it's the use of nutrition. Some of my colleagues say nutrition and supplements, and I just want to say that, but I just say nutrition because I'm a farm boy, I like the foods. To optimize brain health and to treat and prevent mental health disorders. Prevent's my favorite word in that sentence, because we're not in the prevention business in mental health yet. And this is, I guess, in some ways, the promise, right? And how I want you to listen to this. If you eat these food categories, do you get that? My wife started doing CrossFit during the pandemic, and so this is a picture of her arms on my brain. Do you end up with a more, and by stronger, I probably mean more resilient brain? We think you can do this if you focus on some of the new science around brain and brain growth. Many of you have heard this idea of neuroplasticity or neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, the making of new brain connections. Neurotrophins are the hormones that command that, and the one that's at the top of the list is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It is everywhere in the brain. It's associated low levels of BDNF or expression of BDNF with depression and many other mental health disorders. But also what's interesting is a number of nutrients. So for example, if you're anemic, you stop making as much BDNF. And if we give people iron, they make BDNF. So there's 6 nutrients now very tied and linked to the expression of BDNF. Here's one of them, zinc, one of my favorite brain nutrients. And again, as much as I talk about nutrients, like, well, I don't want you to run out and grab a zinc supplement. I hope that what this talk compels you to do is really translate the science into food on your plate. So top source of zinc for me is going to be pepitas, pumpkin seeds, and oysters. Neuroplasticity, just quickly, these are some of the illustrations from Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, because I want us all to be thinking not just about like serotonin and chemical imbalance. It's like, I don't know, like 1996, like let's think 2021. Let's think about brain growth. Let's think about how we each have some capacity. You can do all this stuff right and still get depressed or still get anxious, still have bipolar disorder. I'm not one of those like food is the silver bullet for everything people. I'm a psychiatrist, so I've seen everything, and it's really humbled me. I use meds, I use therapy. I love both of those things. But if we can think about neuroplasticity is a way for us to engage with our brain health. And then also think about neuroinflammation. So I guess right now I just want to, like, before we jump into the data, kind of high level concepts that I think are new in terms of thinking about depression and anxiety, which is we can make the brain grow. We've been talking about inflammation, right? That's like in every blog everywhere right now. What is that? And also, hey, it's not just your body, right? It isn't just achy joints. What's really concerning about inflammation is the way it affects your brain. And I talk about that in the book. I interviewed Roger McIntyre, a real expert in this area. And I was really surprised how clear he was about the way that inflammation affects cognitive circuits. It affects our mood, and it increases anxiety. And then we think, again, what causes inflammation? And a central causative factor is what we eat. because it's one of those major environmental signals. Okay? You can do something to control environmental toxins. You certainly can do things to control microbiome problems. You can sleep better. You can stop smoking. You can engage in stress reduction. This will all help inflammation. But if you're eating lots of sugar and fast food and things filled with fillers and omega-6 fats, you're just going to probably have more inflammation. And then that matters now. You can't talk about brain health in 2021 without saying the microbiome. So there, I said it. And I have a whole illustration on it for you because these are all the bugs that live in your gut, in your colon primarily. And it's not just bacteria, there's viruses, there's all kinds of stuff down there. They do a lot for us. They extract about 20% of the calories we get from our food. The microbiome pulls out. They feed the bugs, the colonocytes, the lining of our colon, and then they communicate with the brain. And so this is really at the frontier of a piece of nutritional psychiatry, which is how does the type of bacteria living in your gut affect your brain health? And can we create a microbiome? And it seems that based on the research you can, that is going to promote more mood stability, better cognitive functioning, and less anxiety. But, there's some headwinds we're all facing because we did a whole number on human food over the last 100 years. My first book, The Happiness Diet, I got a big dose of education in this, and it's really depressing, I would say. Probably some of the most depressing stuff I've ever read, which is really looking at how the food supply in some ways really got radically altered and human food got destroyed. As we began to really be focused on cleanliness, we began to be, some good ideas, right? Hygiene's important, but the idea of live and living foods, which again is now coming really popular, 100 years ago, is like, let's kill all the bacteria, let's make this stuff shelf stable, let's get off the farm. Let's stop eating lard. And in doing that, we switched the base of our food supply from kind of an omega-3, like a grass-based system, towards more omega-6s, a more vegetable oil-based food supply. And I'll show you an illustration just in a second. We also added stuff, food dyes, preservatives, trans fats. Remember when I was like, Bloomberg outlawed trans fats? And I had one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, down with the trans fats. And I was like, what are trans fats? Where do they come from? And so as you do a little research and you realize they came from us. 1912, Edward Kaiser, a German biochemist, came across the Atlantic with like a little vial of trans fats because he had hydrogenated cottonseed oil. And we introduced it into the human food chain and food supply with really no testing. I mean, the only thing Procter & Gamble had made prior to that was like soap. All right, well, so this is what happens then. We process food and hey, look, we end up not really, this is old data, the new data is way too depressing. We end up not getting these key nutrients for brain health is the key. This is the percentage of people, this isn't deficiency, but the percentage of US population not meeting the RDA. And then just in terms of, just to illustrate, a shift in the food supply, we started eating soybean oil. They estimated here, these researchers, 1,000-fold increase. So like, what's the problem with that? It's an inexpensive oil, like who cares? The issue is that soybean oil has these polyunsaturated fatty acids, essential fats, that are more pro-inflammatory. At least this is kind of one of the theories in how inflammation and inflammatory factors have changed. That we went from eating a Paleolithic diet to maybe the ratio of it was like 1 to 3. Like we're eating more omega-6s, but we just used to eat a lower ratio. And then you can see that, this is human fat tissue. So they just like take a little fat sample and measure how much linoleic acid is the main omega-6 fat. And you can just see we've like doubled the amount of this fat in our body. So I want to hop into the nutritional psychiatry data now and make sure that I don't burn all of my time just talking about soybean oil. I just want to illustrate, there's not that omega-6 fats are like the worst thing, but just to illustrate, I would say the argument for olive oil and against soybean oil or seed oils. This is the first study that really caught my eye, 2009. What we begin to see are correlational studies. This is the best of those. Instead of being just cross-sectional one moment in time, this is a prospective epidemiological study that follows 10,000 university students in Spain over 4.5 years. It's a very well-controlled trial. The models you see on the left over here, these models are them kind of sifting through the math and the modeling differently, as you can see, excluding participants with depression, for example, in the first 2 years. So they're really trying to say how does diet really affect the pathogenesis and evolution of depression in college students? Really important question. What they find is the 5 to these categories here is basically if you're in the top half, so you eat most like grandma did, so to speak, but your grandma was like in Spain. So you're eating a Mediterranean diet. You see a reduction of, between 30 and 50% in various models in depression over 4.5 years. Now, just imagine if we had an intervention that could take away a third of depression in college. So then these are all of the epidemiological studies looking at dietary pattern and depression. This is the meta-analysis that ends up finding that about 18.2% in all of the studies is the kind of effect, i.e., if you eat a healthier diet or a traditional dietary pattern, you end up with about, in that population, about 18% decreased risk in depression. Also, there's correlational data on brain size. This is individuals eating a healthy diet and just showing that, not only do you have a bigger brain, that's a good thing generally, but you have a brain that shrinks more slowly if you eat a healthy dietary pattern. Then we get into the real data. These are the randomized clinical trials. So these are important because all the other stuff is correlation. Correlation doesn't equal causation. But gosh, if we could do a randomized trial, we could begin to really think about prescribing food in a clinical setting. This was an accident. It was a trial looking at elderly depression, and they needed a control group. Their control group was talking about food using government pamphlets. And what they found is that in that group, they had people really stay. So 77% completed a 2-year study. That's a really good retention rate. And then they saw this really robust reduction in depression scores that then lasted. So talking about food in a mental health setting led to a reduction in depression. But that was just a mistake. This trial was really intentional. Felice Jacka is really one of the major leaders and researchers in nutritional psychiatry. Michael Burke is a renowned researcher in mood disorders in Australia, I think with over 1,000 publications to his name. The SMILES trial added a modified Mediterranean diet to individuals already in mental health treatments. So 12-week parallel single blind, because you can only it's hard to double blind food, right? I don't know if I'm giving you the wild salmon or the lab raised salmon, right? But how would you do that? So they're all going to be single blind, unfortunately. Adjunctive dietary intervention, meaning we're adding on food to normal clinical setting. This is kind of like what I do. You come to see me, maybe I'll give you meds, maybe we'll do therapy, but I'm going to add some food onto that. Not a huge trial, 67 people. But what they found is individuals who were given the Mediterranean diet, a third of them went into full remission. So if that was a medicine, it would be $1 billion drug. Remission is very hard to find in depression. The number needed to treat was 4.1. That's significant because adding on another medicine to an antidepressant, the number needed to treat in some of those trials is like 10. So I've got to give 10 patients a second medicine before I get one better. This then gets followed up with the Healthy Meds trial. This is even better. It's not with a dietitian. This is a Mediterranean style cooking class. That would get my depression better. It's like, what are you doing tonight, Ramsey? It's like, oh, just going to my Mediterranean style cooking class with me and all my friends. We're going to do an olive oil tasting and, learn to cook some food. Bigger trial, 152 people, 3 months. And depression scores improved. The low dose fish oil, that was kind of to normalize things. It wasn't enough of a dose that would be an antidepressant. But again, they see depression scores significantly improve and then sustain. So how does this happen? We don't know exactly. It could be that some of those nutrient insufficiencies are being treated. It could be, again, around this idea of neuroplasticity, BDNF, and inflammation that I think has something to do with this. As people eat more traditional diets, they tend to eat more plants, not to be plant only, but just more plant forward. And with that, you get lots of phytonutrients. Sometimes those are called antioxidants, but really those are more like signaling molecules is how I think of them. The microbiome, this is going to be so exciting for us to see what happens with the story, but eating more plants, eating more fermented foods generally tends to promote a more diverse microbiome. And then maybe getting on these traditional diets is just getting you off the fact of like all the badness of modern human food, all of the obesity and diabetes and heart disease, and hypertension that tends to be caused primarily. It's like salt, right? Why do we ever tell people not to eat salt? There's no reason. because the only place where you get into a problem with salt, it's not your salt shaker. 95% of sodium consumed in America and in the world is from processed food. Right? The salt shaker is fine, but that's a kind of, I think, example of the toxic effects of modern food. This is just one of my favorite studies. It took me a little while to understand this. So I just want to walk through it, and then I'm going to go through some foods to eat, and then we're going to get to our question and answer. So this is looking at interleukin 6. Interleukin 6 is a measure, blood marker of inflammation. It's not a perfect marker, but it's the one that researchers use. And these are looking at people with depression. Now, there's a few things to note here. Notice that people with depression, whether on a healthy or non-healthy diet, they have higher levels of interleukin 6. And so there's a little challenge that researchers have where when you get depressed, inflammatory factors go up. But what this study suggests is that even with depressed patients, when they're on a healthy diet, they have lower inflammatory factors. This was over 6 years. And so again, just to have this notion of, all right, if we think about some depressions as having an inflammatory element, Mediterranean diet in this study, the researchers concluded buffered the effect. So you'd still have inflammation because you're depressed, but it would lower it. So maybe that's one of the ways this is working. So we try and apply this in the clinic by saying we have a chef and therapist and social worker who came onto my practice a number of years ago. We have another psychiatrist on our team, but we're trying to really, for the last 10 years, just apply food and think about food in the clinical setting in mental health, which is to think what are brain foods and how do we get really specific in helping patients think about what foods to add into their diet? How can we tell people from calorie counting to nutrient density? Can we share some information about neuroplasticity that gets exciting to people? When we talk to patients about food, this is what I heard early in my career, right? People told me they count calories, they're kind of very proud, they're avoiding cholesterol, they're avoiding fat, they give me a little sly smile, like they don't eat any red meat. And then they turn their head the other way and tell me, but don't worry, doctor, I'm taking care of my brain with my 2 glasses of Cabernet every night. And that's their brain food plan. And you know what, again, when I look at this, my main concern is like, this does not taste very good to me. It's not compelling. I can't impress my wife with a nice meal based on these principles at all. I mean, I guess you can, you don't have to put red meat in there, but it just doesn't, and it doesn't seem very fun to me. And so when I think I eat a healthy diet, I kind of wanted to think, how do we add more fun into this? Also, so I started paying attention to my patients, what they ate. This is way back in the day. I'm a kind of middle-aged guy now. So these smartphones came out. So it's like, patients can take a picture of their foods. I had this young man who was depressed. So this is everything he ate for 3 days. And when you look at this, and I'm treating him for a pretty significant depression, it's like, this is not going to help, right? The number 1 molecule on this page is glucose. All the pasta, that's glucose. I tell people to eat the rainbow. Over here, he was like, oh, doc, I'm eating the gummy bear rainbow. Not the gummy bear rainbow, but just not a lot of real food, a lot of carbohydrates, really very few plants besides like whatever this bad lettuce is on his, maybe it's okay lettuce, on his, Chipotle. So we kind of go first to a set of nutrients is my question. What are the nutrients that are most important for depression? Dr. Laura Lynch-Johnson and I published this Antidepressants Food. It's an open access article you can check out if you want to. And we found that there were 12 nutrients with significant levels of evidence that they are involved in the treatment or prevention of depression. And then from that, we calculated, what foods, very simply, what foods have the most of those nutrients per calorie? Not that these are the only foods that you need to eat, but if you wanted to get these 12 nutrients for the lowest number of calories, this is what you would choose. And we wanted to see what lessons these lists teach us. Because when it comes to recommending things to patients, I just take that very seriously. And I think a lot of people don't, and they love to tell people not to eat this or to eat this. And I just see that do a lot of damage. I see a lot of people come in really confused, really struggling, not sure who to trust. And so what this taught us was to look at food categories. Look at these top 10 right here. See how you see the leafy greens, you see the rainbow vegetables, right? So you see lots of colors. And so that's really led to this lesson in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. The book, it's 2 of the first weeks of the plan are leafy greens and then rainbow vegetables. Because that's really what this list ends up meaning to me. There are obviously lots of things on there that I love that are good for the brain that aren't on the plant food list, right? I love myself some lentils, some black beans, red beans. Those are great for your brain, in my opinion, not on the list. So again, don't confuse this with the only thing you should eat. Here at the animal foods, the reason I wanted to include animal foods is there's a real deception in nutrient profiling systems where because it's based on calories, there are never going to be any animal foods in like the top 100 because animal foods have more calories. And so it really skews the results. It makes us think plants are healthier than animal foods, which probably isn't true. Plants are just different than animal foods. So look at our top 5 here. Really important lesson. Oysters, clams, and mussels. So bivalves, 3 of the top 5. And what you end up seeing on this list overall is a little bit of wild meat, some things like fish roe, wild fish, a little bit, where was it, elk somewhere? Probably I put elk on the list, probably just trying to get Joe Rogan's attention. Elk's not on the list, I'm teasing. But so again, seafood, wild meats, organ meats, and bivalves. And so again, the hope is, how can we take these nutrients and help patients or help people think about them in terms of food? Because so often we hear you need more iron. We'll get an iron supplement, or you get a protein powder iron with it. And I see my role, I guess, in this food as medicine movement. And I guess as a kid from a farm, that like, I think it's really cool we get this stuff from food. You know, we did not isolate or identify a single vitamin until 1912. So it's been 110 years. And prior to that, there's a lot of like human love, smiles. And so I think the right nutrients are here for us. But this is one of the downloads in my e-course, Eat to Beat Depression. And again, just trend like top iron foods that I don't know what these on your plate, but I hope you'll consider them. This one's liver. Right? We don't eat that anymore, but really, really nutrient, probably the most nutrient dense part of an animal. Clams. I bet I'm the only doctor that's recommended you eat clams. I'm a big fan of clams, top source of vitamin B12, but also look at all this iron you get. And this is going to be heme iron in these, highly absorbable. What I'm a fan of non-heme iron, pepitas, pumpkin seeds, and cashews is what these are, 2 interesting sources of iron. And of course, dark chocolate. We'll talk more about dark chocolate if I don't run out of time. I gotta talk about, this is the La Anita cacao farm where I decided to, this is like a research trip I decided to go. When you eat too much cacao, you have this strange dizzying experience where you watch your child jump onto some zip line and you don't know whether it's really that good for you. I just wanted to put, this is the cacao flour. It's just interesting to think every bite of chocolate you've ever had started with the pollination of that tiny, see how tiny that little flower is? And then this is the cacao. The way chocolate gets made is that cacao fruit inside of it has this kind of sweet, slimy, innards. These are the cacao beans in here in the raw form. They then get flies, come from the rainforest and do their little magic dance and put all the bacteria on there. They ferment, they then dry. This is actually straight dry from here is my favorite way to eat chocolate. The cacao bean with its shell on is amazing. But then there's also some interesting data about dark chocolate. This was a randomized trial that looked at individuals 50 to 69 who consumed, they gave them this high cacao flavanol versus a low cacao flavanol drink. And they found that there is enhancement both in memory centers in the brain, the dentate gyrus specifically, but also in cognitive tests that correlate with dentate gyrus function. Another thing we do is we take ideas like that, like dark chocolate's nutrient dense, and we begin to think like, how do we get swaps, right? How do we take this stuff, which is like standard American fare, and how do we not just tell people, hey, eat the Mediterranean diet, but how do we increase the nutrient density of these foods? So like, I like French fries. I do. I'm sorry. I like them. I love them even. But I can't eat French fries all the time, but I can eat oven-baked sweet potato fries. And I don't know, we're making some pretty darn healthy oven-baked potatoes right now at home that I'd put on par with an excellent French fry. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to burn through these slides, and then Jean's going to ask some questions. But I just want to talk quickly as I go through these slides. And sorry to rush. I just wanted to give you all my slides in terms of the info. So our brains are made of fat, and it's really interesting. Our brain got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then after Neanderthals, it got a little smaller and more concentrated. Also, if we look at where the human brain evolved, it was rivers and marshy lands and places with lots of small fish and lots of bivalves. And evolutionary biologists, it's actually another great book. Just so I'm not only plugging my book. If you're going to buy my book, which I hope you do, I'd definitely buy Brett's book. This is The History of the Human Brain. Which is a little self-serving because I'm in this book, and let me just tell you, it brought tears to my eyes when I saw it, to be in a book that's Brett is my editor at Medscape Psychiatry, but he's a physician, and just it's a fascinating story about the evolution of the human brain. The idea, though, is that lots of omega-3 fats, lots of minerality helped the human brain evolve. And let's talk about an oyster. So nutrient density, I've used that term a lot. How many calories in 6 oysters? I love it when I'm in an audience. I once was speaking to physicians, and an elderly physician got up and said, there's about 750. And so there's 60 calories, about 10 calories in a small oyster. Nutrient density, again, that principle, right? Just look at how much nutrition you get. This is, again, why the oyster is really high on the antidepressant food scale. What do these things do? Again, what's really important is, I think, to connect the food all the way to its function in the brain, that we incorporate omega-3 fats into our neuronal membranes, right? That's what brain cells are made of, in part. Also, this BDNF gene, right? I mentioned that 6 or 7 nutrients can lead to increased BDNF. Omega-3 fats are one of them. And then when our brain cells touch, they're like a little bit like, like middle schoolers that are dance, like they get close, then don't touch. I guess that's not middle schoolers anymore, but the synapses, they don't touch. And so we float this little vessel, fatty vesicle across that gap. And when there's more omega-3 fats in there, there's some idea that they function a little better. So then all this talk about omega-3 fats leads us to fish, leads us to what's the perfect fish. So that's going to be a fish that's high in omega-3 fats, that's sustainable, that doesn't have a lot of mercury. And really, as long as you're avoiding big old fish and eating seafood, I don't know, 3 to 5 times a week, mercury concerns really, your body's very good at getting rid of mercury. Expense, this is what I'm actually part of my Men's Health Brain Food Challenge. I'm making wild salmon burgers from canned salmon, but even frozen salmon. So salmon is frozen, but you can get great deals on this. This is the rocket pie and Eat Complete. My last cookbook is a clam pie because I wanted all my vegan friends to have an option to get all their B12 through this delicious pie. This is my happy place when I get nervous. This is the largest kale field in America. What's fascinating about our food supply is in between all that kale is a weed called purslane that's even more nutrient dense than kale. And it just gets ground back up and thrown into the soil, whereas the kale gets eaten. This is the first clinical trial I did, giving kale to Yale students. You can see it worked. Look how happy they are. They're all in the middle of the winter of their friend. I'm just kidding. This is the Yale Sustainable Food Project, and I just love this picture. But I do think it kind of shows something about how food makes us happy. It's not just all the delicious nutrients, but it's also the experience of growing food together, picking food together, eating food together. Kale taught me a lot. I was the king of kale for a while. I launched National Kale Day. I wrote 50 Shades of Kale. And in my new book, I talk a little bit how I'm a reformed kale evangelist now. Kale taught me something about brain food, that in general, brain foods are nutrient dense, they're versatile in the kitchen, and they're locally available. Meaning that, obviously I'm in Indiana, I can't find oysters here, but there is a lot of local food that I can find here. Locally raised grass-fed meat. I can find lots and lots of organic produce. I can support local farms. So, these kind of, for me, are some rules that I use as I'm looking for food. Just quickly, some of the other categories, and then I'll go to the questions, which is I'm really a big fan of nuts, beans, and seeds. I know they've gotten some negative press recently. I'm not really sure that's based on actually any scientific evidence. Look at almonds, right? 37% of your vitamin E. There are some nutrients like vitamin E, you just don't find them in a lot of foods. Olive oil, almonds, avocados. So great snack, nuts. I think most of you are in California, so I guess I'm sure you know this. Beans and legumes, whatever concerns people have, any of those anti-nutrients, when you cook things, they go away. And so that's why we cook beans. And so lots of folate. This is lentils, one of our favorites in our house. Lentil soup, really easy, really inexpensive, 90% of your folate. And again, that microbiome needs fiber. Look at a couple lentils. I mean, most Americans don't even get close to getting half the fiber they need a day. This was French onion soup from Eat Complete because I like France, I like cheese, I like onions. But you can't put it in a cookbook for health because it doesn't have any nutrition in it really. Added a can of white beans, it became an incredibly nutrient dense version of the soup. Eat your colors, you guys have all heard this. The reason these different colors represent different flavonoids, right? Again, signaling molecules. Just there is one issue, right? Is you're eating the different rainbow colors, you want to be cautious. There's risks and benefits of every medical intervention. And so I just want to be the person to warn you because nobody warned me. And when it happened, it was surprising. Let me tell you. First, it's like a tingling feeling. And if you guys heard about this, it's called rainbow finger. All right. And it just, if you eat a lot of rainbow vegetables, it can happen to you. I just want you to expect it. It's also feels amazing. fermented foods, and then I'm going to wind up. This is the last food category, just because as we understand the microbiome, all those live bacteria in fermented foods are one of the things that kind of seeds the microbiome with healthy bacteria. You can eat those instead of taking a probiotic. That's why kefir is on that list of power players. It has more CFUs than your probiotics, for sure. It has more CFUs than really anything I've ever seen measured. And this is just this is the lining of your colon. And I just think it's important to talk about, the microbiome is like floating around in here, but look at just how beautiful these little villi are, that their whole job is to kind of be there swirling in their food and absorbing everything we need. It's really wonderful. And then just, again, this vagus nerve is what connects our brain to our gut. And there's so much we're learning now about this bidirectional communication, to the point where actually there's this great trial that came out a couple of years ago of giving individuals with mania and bipolar disorder a probiotic upon hospitalization, and leading to a 90% decrease in hospitalization rate at 6 months compared to placebo. So again, that needs to be replicated, but there's some exciting stuff. There are even meta-analyses now looking at probiotics to alleviate depression. The bottom line is it's something to think about. This is not a home run yet, but it's something for us all to consider. And if we are struggling with our mood or with anxiety, to think about, all right, did you have a bunch of antibiotics recently? Have you not eaten plants and fermented foods for a while? Can you do those things and have an effect? So along with my pharmacy, which I hope you appreciate is something that I employ when needed, there's the farm pharmacy. And I ask you to think about these power players. I hope it makes some sense why they're here on this list, why when, docs like me recommend olive oil for your brain, or why red peppers are there. I didn't talk a lot about eggs and meat. I go over that in the book, but I hope you hear my message. My little rhyme is seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. And these are some, I think, kind of takeaways of, I really think you can eat to build a better brain. I think the evidence says that. I like the idea personally and professionally that we can put our brains into brain grow mode, that we can do something in our everyday life. I like that because I feel it empowers me, and I think it empowers my patient, and I hope it empowers you. Not that if you're feeling bad, gosh, whoops, you did a bad thing, your brain's shrunk to nothing, but that there's an opportunity for you in the new science. Thinking about neuroplasticity and inflammation, in some ways, these opposing forces, like brain grow versus like it's on fire. Dietary pattern and nutrient density, just two take-home principles for nutritional psychiatry. And I hope you're here not to be scared of fish, and to remember the clammies, and to remember me as the doctor who prescribes you the clammies, especially when you're enjoying pasta vongole sometime. I think the data, in all seriousness, points to a whole foods diet or a Mediterranean dietary pattern is being protective for depression and dementia, and probably anxiety and ADHD. Actually, speaking with Felice Jack about her study, she in the book, there's a great quote where she basically says that the data was also there for depression. And then if we learn from history, if we put the genie back in the bottle, not that we want to stop our evolution as eaters and always eat the Paleolithic diet. I like granola. I like that, we've discovered some new stuff in modern food. But that in terms of putting the genie back in the bottle, we've gotten away and began to eat a lot of processed foods. I hope you'll join me in a bunch of brain food challenges I have going on. One's on Men's Health Magazine, the other's on my Instagram. The Brain Food Clinic is a digital mental health clinic. We provide counseling, therapy, mental health services, coaching, and mental fitness improvement. We've got a weekly newsletter, Friday Feels, that's going out tomorrow, so hop on our list. And then if any of you are clinicians, we created the first ever nutritional psychiatry clinical training and community. So we have an e-course that's a 10-hour CME e-course. It's all available on my site, drewramseymd.com. But the course also, if you complete it, you can join. We have a community of about 50 clinicians that meets every month to talk about nutritional psychiatry, to do some supervision, and to have some community around this great idea that you can feed your mental health. So everyone, thank you so much. I think
we have a bunch of questions, and that was just fun.
Learning good. I'm glad you had fun. I've done my slide deck. I told Jean at the beginning, I've been like it's a fun way to launch a book actually, but I've just been on Instagram Live pretty consistently for hours every day since Friday with these ring lights. And so it's like, so when I close my eyes, I see the ring lights now, but you learn that, you can have fun in this digital format, but it's nice to have the slides. I appreciate it.
Well, your passion shows. So I love that. So a couple questions before we go to the audience questions. One that I have is, what really sparked your interest in food and mental health? Like, that's pretty cutting edge. I mentioned that we put out a post today about anxiety, and it was written by a local psychiatrist, and there was no mention of food. So nutritional psychiatry is pretty new, and I
You
love
know,
it. But I'm just curious as to what your spark was.
I think it was a combination that my family, by moving out to the country, it had always been kind of healthy and ahead of the organic movement and kind of, a little neurotic about eating healthy food even back then. And, kind of part of that, like, sort of fallout of that, like, hippie move, like I ate a lot of tofu as a kid, right? And so there's this orientation around food and food being related to health very early for me. And so in my personal life, when I was in medical school, I was actually a low-fat vegetarian. I was a college athlete, and I was having a lot of trouble with my energy. I mean, it was really kind of embarrassing. I'd fall asleep a lot in class in the afternoon, um, and so my interest got sparked, I think, just in residency as I'm eating this vegetarian diet. And back then, that was super weird. And we're learning about, this new science about omega-3 fats. And I just remember having this like realization of like, oh, we're prescribing fish oil pills, and we're all like excited about that we have this like natural thing that might help with mood. But like, where do they come from? And like, what are they made of? And wow, like a fish oil pill has like 300 milligrams. A piece of salmon has 4,000 milligrams. And like, huh. And it just kind of got me curious, like, well, if we're going to start talking about food, what we do? And then I started doing it in my practice. And I guess the other thing too is those atypical antipsychotics came out, and I was working in a community mental health center prescribing a lot of them. And it, that just leads to a lot of weight gain. So it's just weird to be like a young doctor and I'm helping people with their schizophrenia, but they're gaining 50 pounds and getting diabetes. And then when I went to tell them like what to eat, it was like, oh yeah, don't eat your egg yolks. And I'm like, this is super anemic nutrition advice. It is not going to like change anyone's behavior, and it wasn't helping anyone. So I think all that kind of converged and got me really interested. And then I came with that little cute title, The Happiness Diet. I couldn't like get it out of my brain. Eventually my wife told me like, you gotta like be quiet about that or write a book about it. And so I don't know, that's how it happened.
Awesome.
My wife told me to do it, Chief, and that's how it happened.
I love that. Those wives are good to motivate their
Wives are
husbands.
good. Wives are good.
So I have a question. Do you get resistance from your patients to try food? And if so,
You know,
how do you push beyond that resistance?
for
What do you
for
think
sure, I think I'm not a very pushy guy. My foodie vow kind of is I'm a light touch with the food, because people come to me with so many deep mental health concerns that I evaluate it. But I really try and time where people don't feel a pressure, and where if people don't want to eat, they say like, I'm not going to eat any of this stuff. I don't push too hard at first. I treat a lot of young men, and so I run into a lot of resistance, and I find resistance is a little bit like caffeine headaches. Like there's a narrative that we're also addicted to caffeine, and if you stop, your brain's going to explode and you'll never wake up again. And then there's the simple reality: if you take care of your sleep, you don't need another cup of coffee probably ever again. And I just know that from personal experience. I've got my coffee right here, but there's this sort of narrative that we create at times around what things are going to be like. And so I address resistance as really just small steps. I always focus on foods people like. People like pasta. I love pasta. How can we make your pasta have more plants? Do you like seafood? Any seafood? Mussels? Great. So I kind of look at how can we try things. And then, anybody who's a picky eater, or like young men who can't take care of themselves, they're pissed about that on some level, right? They want to go out for sushi. Like everybody else seems to be having fun with that. And so helping them kind of get motivated and interested. And then I was just a very picky eater. Like I'm a farm boy. I didn't eat any seafood. Now I like shuck oysters at parties for people. So I really believe there's this evolution in our diet, in our palate that can happen. And so that's kind of how I address some of that stuff. I have a lot of sympathy that people don't like food or don't want to try stuff. But then why are people resistant? Oh, it costs too much. It's like, I'm gonna make wild salmon burgers in between this talk and another talk live from my kitchen. I'm not a very good cook. It's just like, there's like a few dollars, and it's amazing source of omega-3 fat. So, and then cooking skills. Like I had one of my patients like, I don't know this saute thing you keep talking about. And I was like, what do you know how to do? He's like, I know how to fry an egg in olive oil. I'm like, okay, just imagine you're sauteing the egg. And that's how sauteing works. He's like, really? I was like, yeah. So, sometimes it's just helping people. I think it's my, I think the reason I like bringing food into the clinical room also is because it allows us to form alliance and have more fun. When we teach clinicians about this, there's a lot of heavy, hard stuff we talk about in mental health. And when that room becomes just that place where you're, struggling with your marriage or struggling with your depression or struggling with your self-esteem, I mean, that's good. That's where that stuff should be. But it's also nice to have, this other part where we can talk about something that both of us do, right? We're both eaters, right? We're both struggling to find healthy food to feed our families. And so, yeah,
Great.
that's how I deal with resistance. I'm a
All right.
psychiatrist. Like it's all resistance. Like people are on time. I'm like, tell me about it. Tell me about it. You're resistant to the session.
So let's say it's the end of your day, you've been working and you come home. What would be like an easy go-to brain healthy meal that you would make? What would you choose to do?
I mean, I can tell you what, let's see. Usually by that time, we try and plan it out early in the day just so it's not too much chaos. When it's chaos like that for us, we usually end up with some sort of gluten-free pasta with pesto on it and white beans. We're a big kind of white bean pesto family. Sheet pan of veggies, olive oil goes into the oven right away. That can be anything. Recently it's been like cabbage, fennel, potatoes, like little fingerling potatoes, onions usually. So just a bunch of veggies and olive oil roasted. For like a snack, I'm kind of like a hummus guy or nuts or, well, I don't know. I'm probably in a little bit, this book thing gets me in a little bit of a fasting state too. There's just a lot of sitting here. So like, this is my oatmeal and peanut butter from this morning. I took like 2 bites, but I don't know. I've been at work all day here in front of the screen and I sip a lot of Earl Grey tea. Those are my senses. I'm trying to think of guacamole. I made a big batch of guacamole. Ooh, and then the mango ginger shrimp ceviche. I can make that in like 5 minutes. And I really love a kind of protein, delicious seafood kind of tapas feel to an afternoon. So that's another thing that I'll whip up really quickly.
Great. You had mentioned BDNF. If do you actually measure those levels on a patient, or is that more like a research?
We don't yet. None of the. It's really hard right now. We're in this spot where like we don't have good biomarkers. We don't have good genetic testing in psychiatry that's really useful. I've been doing genetic testing on patients. I started maybe 5 years ago, and it's a real mixed bag in terms of deliverable clinical. Like this gene's wrong. Here's my treatment. The evidence is really not there, and so. BDNF is also like fascinating molecule, right? Like I'd love to measure levels, but it's not clear that measuring a level tells us a lot right now. One, probably because levels vary. And two, it's not one of those lab results that we have a good baseline on, I don't think. And so it's not used clinically at all. It's used in the research though. And then I've seen this thing, an inflammatory index being used in the research. And so I wouldn't doubt that some of that will come online. You can measure your BDNF gene. If you did 23andMe, you can take that data, the raw data from 23andMe, go to some place like geneticgenie.com, which I don't have any affiliation with. You just plug in your raw data and it looks at all the genes in your methylation cycle and it'll tell you whether you have like any BDNF mutations or not. But even that, like,
what do you
do about that exactly? But great question. This is my hope. My hope in 10 years, if Gene has me back, is that I'll be able to talk about a clinical method that we have in mental health that I hope we help contribute to, that really gives people more information and more data, and kind of allows us to partner in a different way. Psychiatry is still so kind of hierarchical, and that I think is really needs to shift, right? It's from like doctor to patient as opposed to like we're engaged in this together. So.
Yeah. All right. So we have a bunch of questions. Hopefully we can get to whenever you need to stop, we'll stop.
Okay.
One of the questions, and we've heard this, I've seen this question many times. So for omega-3 and vegetarians, is algae supplementation recommended since
yeah, I would say that if you have mood problems and you don't want to take a fish oil pill, so the fish and the oyster, they bioconcentrate the omega-3 fats from a few species of algae for us. And so, an algal supplement is a way of if you don't want to engage in any animal cruelty or you don't like seafood or usually seafood allergies are to protein, but I find a lot of people just want to avoid like anything fishy. If you've had anaphylactic shock or you've had an allergy, like I certainly appreciate that. So the algal oil is the way to go. Most of those supplements are just DHA, whereas in the trials that are positive in mental health, it's always a mix. Usually it's more EPA than DHA. And so I think just being aware that some of the algal oils are just DHA, and you want a nice balance, pretty even mix of EPA and DHA is one way to think about it. You can also find EPA, and I suspect almost all of those are fish oil derived. Maybe somebody, I bet some smart supplement person is now like, reducing
how to get
DHA to
EPA
EPA and making some vegan EPA. But yeah, you want to try and get both.
Okay.
And by the way, the dosing in mental health settings is like 2 grams. That translates to a teaspoon of fish oil for me. So like when I put patients on fish oil, I say like, have a teaspoon. Like I just want you to have a teaspoon every day. Let's really like bounce your levels up and see like, is there a mood effect? And remember also, this is where people are really bad in mental health, all of us, myself included, that we're so impatient, right? Like antidepressants take a month. Psychotherapy takes a few months, like brain food takes a month. And so that's where I think it's tough sometimes to really stick with something like a fish oil pill, because you're wondering like after day 3, like, do I feel better? Do I feel better? Is this working?
Right. This is a good question. Your take on resveratrol. In other words, is red wine truly considered healthy for the brain, since ethanol is not necessarily a healthy ingredient to take in with the wine? How do you juggle the two?
I think resveratrol, unfortunately, the big headline about resveratrol, I think, is GlaxoSmithKline spent like $780 million to buy the rights or buy some of the science and had a pretty negative trial. So I think if you have depression, alcohol is really tricky, because I think a lot of us, myself included, are comforted by a glass of wine or relaxed. We all can use that as a way to kind of talk ourselves into like we're relaxing and it tastes nice and it's self-care in some way. We're having a nice conversation with our spouse, and just, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. And so it's one of those things that I think is a headwind to mental health in general. The resveratrol data, resveratrol is just like a lot of phytonutrients. They're interesting. They do a lot of interesting stuff. The concentrations in the resveratrol trials were like, 2,000 bottles of wine or something. And so where I'm mostly skeptical of things that are resveratrol is what tends to drive those headlines, and that excitement tends to be marketing campaigns that usually are some sort of supplement company or motivated player in that space. So
gotcha.
If you want your resveratrol, you should eat some grapes.
Good answer. All right. My son experiences depression when he eats gluten. What do you think is going on with that? And what's your take on gluten?
By the way, I'm sorry your son's experiencing depression, but I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Great finding. So for sure, about 1% to 2% of people have celiac disease. So you should get tested for celiac disease right away. You can do that at your doctor's office. You're looking for transaminase, and now they do a couple other things to see if there's celiac disease. Now also they're testing for gluten sensitivity. What's happening there is when people have sensitivity to gluten or celiac, there's a lot of hype about that. And the good thing about the gluten movement is it's a really good concrete example that something like there are over 1 million people in America that have celiac disease that haven't been diagnosed. And your body has an immune response. You get all the inflammation we've been talking about all hour. And if you remove gluten, it's like I've discovered this in a couple of patients, it's like a miracle. They stop it, the brain fog goes away, the depression goes away, the skin clears up. So then that gets extended where, there's the celiac disease, that's definitive. Then there's this like gluten sensitivity world where like I've gone through periods where I felt pretty gluten sensitive and periods where I digested fine. But there are certainly people with real gluten sensitivity. And so for your son, I would focus on seeing what a gluten-free diet does. And the important thing about that, what I like about that, is it's a first step in a month or 2 weeks, but I would say a month. If the depression isn't better, if it's getting worse, that sort of lets you know that there's more to it than just a gluten issue, usually. And what I like about that intentionality is then you're not sitting around for 6 months wondering whether it gets better. It's like in a month, get an eval. But it's really easy these days to go gluten-free. I'd just also be cautious about all the gluten-free junk food, just because the gluten-free doesn't make it good for you.
Right. Gotcha. What's your recommendation for vegetarians regarding iron?
Let's see. Get your level checked, right? You can get a CBC, because if your level is good, what you're doing is working. A lot of vegetarians and vegans, do end up with some fortified foods in their diet. And so even folks who don't, everyone who's a vegan should take B12 for sure, but a lot of folks don't, and they don't end up B12 deficient. Although about half of male vegans in one study were frankly B12 deficient. But for iron, let's see, what do I like? Well, I like the cashews. I like the pepitas. All of your iron is going to be heme bound. It's going to be heme iron, non-heme iron in plants. And so that's a little less absorbable. So that's where like cooking your iron sources is really helpful. And then
When you cook your iron sources, the iron gets more readily absorbable. I know that if you add acid.
Yeah, you can put lemon juice. I'd cook, if you want iron and you're a vegetarian, what I do is I just cook all my plants in iron skillet. Done. Like everything I eat has some extra iron on it because, and then this, you can see me like searching my memory banks because I get these questions all the time and I'm in middle age. I can remember most of the stuff, but not all of it. And so for every essential nutrient, I created or actually Katrin Witek, who's the illustrator of the book, created an illustration that also has top sources. So that's how the book is really supposed to help you is, so dark chocolate, spinach, but usually red meat, oysters, clams. Those are the sources of iron I recommend. Because I find a lot of vegetarians and vegans, some of their thought is they don't want to consume things that, for example, had a mother, have a face, or there's some kind of rules. Not that I'm trying to like bend the rules, but like clams are kind of interesting and mussels are kind of interesting because they're not as much of an organism to some people. I'm not suggesting to whoever asked this that, but just, for example, I was treating a vegan woman once who's from Belgium. We were talking about her vegan diet, and I was kind of nervous, where she's going to be 12 in her iron. And then she's like, oh, but I do eat lots of mussels, at least like once or twice a month because I'm from Belgium. And I was like, that's in some ways a sort of reasonably ideal, right? Lots of plants and lots of bivalves.
Okay. Are the anti-nutrients in whole grains cooked away, like you mentioned with beans?
I think so. I mean, I think so. I mean, that's the data that I've seen. I think there's some I don't think of gluten as an anti-nutrient, but like, I don't want to deny the existence of anti-nutrients. Just a lot of times things that are called quote unquote anti-nutrients, they're just plants being smart. Like if you were a plant and you spend all of your energy reaching this little thread down to a rock, and then you suck a little bit of whatever, zinc, magnesium, iron out of it, and you pull it all the way up into your plant self, you're going to hang on to it really tightly. And so that's what those molecules, they bind. The other thing is a lot of times, like in seeds, those are bound because they're hanging on to them until there's germination. And then the protein relaxes. And that's why we see a lot of sprouting is another way to deal with anti-nutrients.
Okay. All right. Have you looked into a pure EPA isocomponent ethyl? It's a pill prescription, only potent anti-inflammatory approved for reduction of major adverse cardiovascular events, but clearly likely will be proven to decrease CNS inflammation and lots of other things.
I've not looked into that.
This was from a physician, by the way.
Yeah, I've not. I know that the thank you for the question and for the info. It sounds like this is an EPA compound or formulation, and I think I haven't seen that study, but I think that there is going to be increasing data. There have been a lot of kind of mixed trials in fish oil mental health, just to say that, but it sounds like this is, what we're seeing is as attention gets paid to these natural molecules, we're seeing with like psilocybin, right? Psilocybin has been around forever, but now psychiatry is like, oh my gosh, psilocybin. So I think we're kind of going back to how can we understand more of, EPA thins your blood just like aspirin does. EPA is a powerful anti-inflammatory. And so, we're giving people high doses of EPA, we're really, in some ways, kind of thinning their blood, going anti-clot, or promoting anti-clotting. So there's But yeah, thank you for the question. I don't know that specific formulation. It's exciting though. I remember when it was after residency where we could like prescribe fish oil pills for the first time. And it felt like, all right, there's a little bit of progress.
Right. If you're allergic to olive oil, is there another best oil to use?
Oh boy, I'm so sorry. By the way, I just want to send some empathy and sympathy. That really sucks. I, I I've not ever heard that. I think it is good for us all to hear, just because you can have an allergy to almost any food. And so with olive oil, I think the nearest thing, it's funny, it's not in the new book. I just had a piece go up with Mind Body Green about like my top fats, because I'm usually, I again, just try and keep it really simple: olive oil, coconut oil, and grass-fed butter. But I would say avocado oil has kind of entered my life a little bit more, for a couple of reasons. I don't really pan fry a lot of stuff or fry food too much, but sometimes I like to get a little crispy yumminess on something. And avocado oil has a higher smoke and heat point than olive oil does. Um, so I would think avocado oil would be an interesting replacement at first to try. I think all the other ones kind of lead into, you know, concerns. I mean, some people would say like olive oil, like, well, there's lard. 50% of lard is oleic acid, and people don't use lard anymore. But if you've never cooked with lard, it's really a fascinating fat to cook with, especially like sauteing vegetables, where it gives just a little tiny speck of lard gives this like really umami richness to sauteed veggies. So if you're an animal eating friendly person, I would think lard. Or if you want a really clean lard, the leaf lard the bakers use might be something to think about. Just again, really small quantity. Those would be some of the fats I would think could be an okay replacement for the olive oil.
Okay. Someone asked, is raw kale harder to absorb than slightly cooked or cooked kale?
You know, I get the raw versus cooked. I mean, thank you for eating kale. I feel like kale's been like, I put kale right up here in the top corner for a reason. Kale's taken a beating recently, as there's been an anti-kale movement. My kind of feeling about raw and cooked foods is yes, that when you don't cook that spinach, you're getting more of the folate, you're getting more of certain heat sensitive phytonutrients, you're getting more of that kind of stuff. Where when you cook it, right, cooking anything is going to kind of denature some of the proteins. You're probably going to get a little more minerality out of that. You're going to get a little more digestibility, especially, some people are fine digesting raw greens and kale, and some people it makes them super gassy and uncomfortable. I think sometimes that's often a chewing factor. When people are like gulping down their kale, it's like, there's a reason it doesn't feel good later. It's that it really needs to be masticated and chewed. Mm-hmm. I like my greens sauteed. It's interesting. I'm not I eat some salads. I am not a huge salad guy. And I think part of it to me is almost like quantity, because once you start sauteing greens, it's like, oh my gosh, like I can eat like a whole thing of whatever myself. And so I like that, because I find it with a lot of olive oil and garlic, it just becomes like a filling part of my plate that, I don't know, what I like about that is just stuff I want, right? It's olive oil and greens and garlic. Gosh, I wonder if there are olive oils from the other thought on that. So I did an olive oil tasting. I put it up on I think it's on my IGTV. I did this olive oil tasting, and I wonder if it's also, olive oils really vary in how kind of spiciness of the polyphenols. And I wonder if you're allergic to some of the polyphenols in some way. And if different olive oil varietals because oleic acid, which is the main fat, it's strange to have an allergy to a fat. So I wonder if it's actually other things in the olive oil. I mean, not that you would want to try this. I don't know. If you don't have a severe allergy, after checking with the doctor, it might be interesting to see if it, like, Spanish olive oil is different than an Italian olive oil.
Right. That's interesting to think like that. Do you think supplements can also lead to a noticeable difference in depression and anxiety as well? Or should you primarily look to change your diet first?
Well, I'm going to have to say yes to both of those. I think, yes, you should look to change your diet. First, like if someone comes to see me and they're really suffering and they don't feel like changing their food and they want to take a multivitamin, I'm all for that. Because the data about treatment of mental health, like if you take an antidepressant and you give it with folate and B12, people get better faster. If you take an antidepressant, you give it with magnesium. We don't really do that in clinical practice that much. I think the downside of the can we just do it through supplements, and not that that's exactly what this person is saying, but is that you lose some of the antidepressant effects of food, which are things like, instead of staying at home isolated, even though you're feeling really anxious and upset and down and depressed, you take a shower, you get your canvas bag, and you go to the farmer's market. And while you're there, you have a nice time, or you see someone, or something happens, or a farmer gives you something that just makes you smile. So there's that way of one of those pernicious symptoms of depression is feeling isolated and not a part of people in a community. That's really hard right now as we're all digital. So food allows us to engage. Like, as I've said, I've never had a hot date over a bowl of supplements, ever. And I've had some great dates in my life. Let me tell you, they were always over food. And I bet your best dates were always over food too. And so there's something more than just the nutrients. In Eat Complete, I have this chapter about eat or heal thyself. And part of the request is that we begin to think of ourselves as eaters within a food system that's designed by our values and our intentions, where it really allows us to think, whether you want to be keto or carnivore or whatever dietary pattern you want to eat, that we do that in a way that brings more joyfulness and connectedness to our lives. So whether that's cooking and eating with other people, doing a potluck once people are vaccinated and this pandemic is under control, so that's why I'm a big fan of food over supplements. Certainly, if you're not getting enough zinc and magnesium or iron or B12, and you take a supplement of that thing, is going to be good for you. I think in addition to that, I don't know, we like got this really fascinating thing, like the coolest thing in the universe. You've got everybody watching's got one, right? It's like you could never buy anything nearly as cool as a human brain. It does everything, right? Dreams, like pursues things, creates, feels, thinks, sleeps, and all we have to do is feed it. And so I think we should feed it right. And I don't think supplements were ever part of the plan for that.
Great. I like that. I'd like to end on that. I think that's a really positive note. There were a couple questions about grocery lists and food, specific recipes. And I think you should, whoever's asking those questions, go on Drew's website, buy his book, because there's some great recipes in his book.
There's 30 recipes in Eat to Beat Depression, and it's for the plan. So the plan goes through leafy greens. Then I give you 5 of my favorite leafy green recipes. Like I give you a pesto formula, because if you're leafy greens, if you think salads, I'm saying salads, you got to come over for my pesto. It's going to blow your mind. Then I want to come over for your pesto, because I bet your pesto would blow my mind. Gina, I bet you make a good pesto. So. And then in Eat Complete, which was my book for this one, this has 100 brain food recipes. 50 of them have beautiful photos. So it's like a real cookbook with scallops and nice. Seafood, meat. It's got lots and lots of vegetarian recipes in it. And then 50 Shades of Kale is 50 kale recipes. So not that you ever would think that you need that, but you might. And so those are, and then we've got free recipes on my website and on my Instagram. We've been posting some recipes. And if you really just need a recipe right now for the wild salmon burger, if you go to the Men's Health Instagram story, I just posted it a few hours ago, and after this, I'm gonna go make it. So
nice. I posted Drew's cocoa and avocado pudding the other day, which really yummy. I added a little bit of cinnamon actually to it, which was
that's good.
Nice little oomph to it.
All
right, this was fabulous. Follow Drew on all of his social media things. Check out his website, buy his books. Follow Soul Food Salon on everything. This will be up on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow or maybe later today. And you can access a lot of this through my website. Drew's stuff will be there forever with all of his contact information. Again, website soulfoodsalon.com. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. And I wish you tremendous luck and love and everything, support for your book launch, which is fabulous. You're doing great.
Thank you so much. It was really nice to spend some time with everyone. I appreciate so many of you staying to the very end. It means a lot to me. I do a lot of these, and to have a nice group like this is really special. Gene, thank you. It's really a treat in the middle of book launch to connect with another physician who cares about this. I can't wait to cook a big brain food meal with you and Annie, and I hope everybody watching will come when we get to do
I can't wait for that day.
I'm looking forward to it. And everybody, please no matter what you heard and kind of resonate with you, I hope you feel inspired to feed your mental health, and I hope some of this talk helps. So Jean, thank you so much.
Great. Bye, guys.